This session is also being recorded. When we begin the presentation, we ask you all to allow BIE to go through the entire slideshow, and then we will ask for comments at the end of the slideshow. Also, please type your name and who you represent in the chat box. This is for our records. All right, so we will begin. My name is Maureen Lesky. I am the Program Manager for the Office of Sovereignty and Indian Education. I'm with the Bureau of Indian Education, and I'm going to ask Ms. Barnett to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, this is Angela Barnett. I am the Program Specialist for JOM, and my office is located at the Oklahoma Area Education Office in Oklahoma City.
Thank you, Angela. One other item I forgot to mention was please look at the BIE website if you are at your computer. This is www.bie.edu/JOM. I typed it in the chat box. We will be referring to some of the documents on the website, such as the Modernization Act. This presentation is also on the website, and the proposed rule, the Federal Register notice that contains the proposed rule in its entirety. So those documents will be helpful for reference as we go through this presentation. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Clint Bowers to give a welcome.
Hello everyone, this is Clint Bowers, Bureau of Indian Education Chief of Staff. I just wanted to welcome you on the call today for this consultation and webinar, and we welcome your comments and your input to help strengthen the program as we look to modernize this based on the legislation that was passed last year. And know that we will take your comments and, in the essence of transparency, put them into a consultation report and make sure that you understand how your comments were provided for the record, how they were input and changed and helped our path forward to improve the program for everyone. On behalf of Director Dearman, as well as the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, Tara Sweeney, we thank you for participating and taking time out of your day to help us improve our services to students, whether they're in Bureau-operated schools, tribally controlled schools, or even public schools receiving Johnstone Valley dollars. It's critical that we partner with you all and improve our services. So thank you for taking this time.
Thank you, Mr. Bowers. We're going to start by going over the agenda for the presentation. The slide shows the first item is the welcome, which Mr. Bowers just did. We will also look at the Johnstone Valley Authority. Then we will discuss the Modernization Act. And then we'll move into the first topic. Topic 1 is the definition of eligible Indian student. The second topic is the funding formula. The third topic is reconciliation and modernization. This is the proposed rule. Then we will provide additional information such as the BIE website, the BIA website, and then the information related to where you can post comments, deadline for comments, and next steps. And we will also be hearing from you with your comments recommendations and questions. To begin with, we will review the Johnson O'Malley Authority. As most of you are aware, in 1934, Congress passed the Johnson O'Malley Act. The purpose of the program was to provide for the educational needs of Indian students. The Act authorized Interior to enter into contracts with states, schools, private non-sectarian organizations, tribes, and tribal organizations. In 1955, BIA established regulations. In 1975, BIE updated the regulations to what is now in effect, which can be found at 25 CFR Part 273. And then most recently, Congress passed the JOM Supplemental Indian Education Program Modernization Act, which a lot of us refer to as the Modernization Act. This also became Public Law 115-404. So right now, as part of this, the implementation of this new law, Interior is proposing changes to 25 CFR Part 273, and we will be collecting your comments and recommendations to inform those proposed changes. And then more specifically, the Modernization Act also directs Interior to make an initial determination of the number of eligible Indian students served or potentially served, and this will be published in a preliminary report which will take into consideration comments from eligible entities, looking at other data sources, and issuing a final report. For more information on the initial determination of the number of eligible Indian students served or potentially served, you can go to the BIE website under JOM programs, and there is some archived materials there related to the initial determination. There's a presentation that you can look at that compares various data sources. After the implementation year, the Act also requires that contracting parties submit the eligible Indian student count, and then also the Act directs Interior to prepare an annual report on the number of eligible Indian students served, discuss any recommendations on funding levels, and then an assessment of the contracts. The annual report is due at the end of the year in December. The Act also requires Interior to complete a rule by December 31st of this year, and then outlined there on the slide, there's 3 things as part of that. The rule is to determine how the regulatory definition of eligible Indian student may be revised to clarify eligibility requirements. Also to determine how the funding formula may be clarified and revised. And then third, to otherwise reconcile and modernize the rules. The first topic is Indian student eligibility. The current CFR 273.12 states that students must be 1/4 or more degree Indian blood and recognized by the Secretary as being eligible for Bureau services. So the main thing to remember in this statement is the "and" that is in bold font. In 1990, a U.S. District Court decision found that the eligibility was too strict. It was too restrictive, having both 1/4 degree Indian blood and recognized by the Secretary, 1/4 degree Indian blood in addition to membership in a federally recognized tribe. So in 1990, the court issued that this was too restrictive, and in 1991, Interior issued a memorandum stating that a student must meet the following requirements: that the student be a member of, or at least 1/4 degree Indian blood descendant of a member of an Indian tribe. So we see the change from the "and," the 1/4 degree Indian blood and a member of a federally recognized tribe, to an "or." And then also part of the memorandum stated that for students to be eligible for JOM services, they had to reside on or near an Indian reservation. In 2015, BIE held consultations on various options for revising eligibility. And there was another proposal at that time, and that was in 2018. BIE proposed a rule that would have required membership in a federally recognized tribe, deleting eligibility for those who are not members but have 1/4 or more degree Indian blood. So at that time, nothing had been changed, and it was decided that the Interior would wait to see what happened with the JOM Modernization Act. So the current proposal is stated here on this slide. An Indian student is eligible for benefits by a Johnson O'Malley contract if the student is from age 3 years through grade 12, is not enrolled in a Bureau or sectarian operated school, and is either at least 1/4 degree Indian blood descendant of a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe, or a member of a federally recognized tribe. So I'm going to pause briefly. That is the proposed rule, the proposed eligibility criteria. And for the next topic, which is the funding formula, Ms. Angela Barnett will discuss funding formula. Angela, give me a second to hand it over to you with the mic. All right, Angela.
Okay. Okay, the second topic is the funding formula. Within the current rule, the funding formula is the number of eligible Indian students multiplied by 25% of whichever is higher, the state average per pupil operating cost or the national average per pupil operating cost. However, this is different from what the formula BIE is currently using since 1988. Since 1988, BIE has been using a JLM funding formula that relies on data from the U.S. Department of Education on the state annual cost per pupil and the national annual cost per pupil to determine a weight factor. The weight factor is then used to calculate the funding. Education Amendments of 1978, PL 95-561, required the Secretary of Education to develop alternative methods for the distribution of JOM funds and published such formula in the Federal Register in 1979. However, it took 10 years to complete the process. Asia, Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, ultimately recommended a new formula based upon a 1.3 weight factor to be phased in over 3 years, which began in FY 89. The Appropriations Act of September 27, 1988, PL 100-446, directed the use of this funding formula recommended by Asia to the Committees on Appropriations in a letter dated June 27, 1988. So as you can see on the slide, the current rule, like I said, is 25% of the weight factor times the number of eligible Indian students. The weight factor is the higher of the state or the national. In the example, the state average per pupil operating cost is $11,500 versus the national, which is $13,000. So they took $13,000 because it's higher of the two and multiplied that by 0.25, which gives you $3,250. So if there were 500 eligible students, then the funding would be the $3,250 times 500,000 and gives you $1,625,000. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide just kind of tells you about the previous slide on the Education Amendments of 1978. And we're required the Secretary of Interior to develop an alternative method. And then it was published in 1979 in Federal Register, and then 10 years later, a new formula based upon a 1.3 weight factor would be phased in over a 3-year time. And then the Appropriations Act of September 27, 1988 directed the use of the funding formula recommended by Asia to the Committees on Appropriation in a letter dated June 27, 1988. And then the next slide is the JOM Modernization Act requires the BIE determine as necessary how the funding formula may be clarified and revised to ensure full participation of contracting parties and provide clarity on the funding process. The BIE proposes to revise the funding formula to reflect the formula used since 1988. The revised language will provide clarity on what source is used to determine the initial calculations, how the calculation is made to determine the weight factor by state, and how the minimum weight factor is to be used should the calculated weight factor for the state fall below the minimum. The funding formula for contracts is to be based on the calculated weight factor and the number of eligible Indian students to be served by the contract. The funding formula to determine the funding will be distributed to each contractor is the weight factor multiplied by the number of eligible Indian students, where the weight factor is the state average cost versus state average cost pupil count divided by the national average per pupil count, or the default weight factor of 1.3 if the calculation in the section results in a weight factor of less than 1.3. So if you look at the slide is showing how the weight factor is going to be calculated. So the weight factor times the number of eligible Indian students. So you take the state over the national, and if it's 1.3 or higher, and if the weight factor is less than 1.3, then 1.3 would be used as a weight factor. And then again, this data is from the U.S. Department of Education from prior year. And then on the next slide, the next slide is actually plugging in some numbers. And so again, the state over the national, and if it's 1.3 or higher, use 1.3. If it's less than 1.3, then you're going to use a 1.3 as a weight factor. So in the example, the state average per pupil cost is $11,500. The national average per pupil operating cost is $13,000. So the weight factor is the $11,500 over $13,000, and that gives you a 0.88. So the 0.88 is less than 1.3, so we're going to use the 1.3 in this example. So if there was 500 eligible students, the funding would be 1.3 times the 500, and it gives you $650,000. And then on the next slide, the next slide is just giving examples of what the weight factor would be if you use the 1.3, or you use the 1.4, or if you use the 1.5. So you have the same number of eligible students at 400, 500, and 600, and then times the 1.3 or the 1.4 or the 1.5. So you can see out to the right what those numbers would be. And then on the next slide, the next slide is the hold harmless provision. The JOM Modernization Act includes a hold harmless provision that remains in effect for 4 years. Excuse me, which states any existing contracting party may not receive an amount that is less than the amount that the party received for the fiscal year preceding the date of enactment of the Act. After expiration of the 4 years, the Act provides that no contractor may receive more than a 10% decrease from the amount received in the prior year. The BIE is not able to recommend a new funding formula without decreasing the funds made available to existing contracting parties. After 4 years, it is possible that existing contractors may receive reductions in funding even beyond the FY 2017 levels. The BIE welcomes comments on this matter for any recommendations on how to revise the funding formula proposed in the rule to support all existing contracting parties receiving JOM funding for JOM programs. For 4 fiscal years following the date of enactment of the JOM Modernization Act, existing contractors will not receive an amount that is less than the amount received for fiscal year 2017, unless the existing contractor fails to submit a complete annual report. The Secretary has found that the existing contractor has violated the terms of the contract under this part, or the number of eligible students reported in the annual report has decreased below the number of eligible students served by the existing contractor in fiscal year 2017. No existing contractor will receive an amount of funding per eligible student that is less than the amount of funding per eligible Indian student that the existing contractor received for fiscal year 2017. Beginning December 31st, 2022, 4 years after December 31st, 2018, date of the enactment of the JOM Modernization Act, no contracting party will receive for a fiscal year more than a 10% decrease in funding per eligible Indian student from the previous year. And that is the hold harmless provision.
Thank you, Angela. The next topic is topic 3, other reconciliation and modernization. One of the primary changes that was made was to update the format to a question and answer format. So at the beginning of the session, I asked you, or I suggested that you take a look at the BIE JOM website. And if you look at the chat box, you can see what that address is. If you don't have the proposed rule in front of you, it would be helpful to take a look at that. And you can see that the proposed rule format is in a question and answer format. Another change that was made was there was an update in terminology. So, for example, there were new definitions added, and there were changes to BIE titles. BIE has recently gone through a reorganization, and so a lot of the previous titles listed are no longer applicable. And so there were updates to titles, and then there's a whole section, 0.106, 273.106, on different terms and definitions. And so that was part of the updates. Other revisions included, as you see on the slide, there were revisions made to make the proposed rule consistent with modern times, what is actually happening. So, for example, 0.132 was revised to reflect the current process of the regional review. 0.134 extends the timeline for approval of contract decision from 60 days to 90 days. And then other new sections. I won't read them all on the slide, but I'll just point out a few of the highlights. 0.154 to 155 talks about when reports are due and consequences of not submitting reports. 0.156 to 158 discusses technical assistance available. 0.194 talks about the authority of the Indian Education Committee regarding the recommendation to cancel contracts. 0.207 to 209 talks about dispute resolution and appeals. As we mentioned in a previous slide, the regulations, the Code of Federal Regulations, has not been updated since 1975, so the rule has been in effect over 40 years without substantial changes. And this is the time to provide recommendations, clarity, suggestions, and in the next slide there's guiding questions. These are questions that we may not necessarily go through, but they're there for you to look at and help you think about which sections you have questions or recommendations on. And then for additional information, again, there's the BIE website, and then there's also the BIA.gov website with a link, and you can look and click on Johnson O'Malley. Comments on the proposed rule are due August 26th of this year. There are a couple of email addresses you can send your comments to. One is consultation@bia.gov, and then there's also regulations.gov. You can go there and then search for JOM and submit comments. The next steps, once we get comments, then those comments will be reviewed, changes will be made as appropriate. A final rule will be published in the Federal Register, and then a final rule will not become effective for at least 30 days after publication. And a final rule is due, again, we mentioned this earlier, but the final rule is due December 31st, 2019. I will unmute all of the callers. We will be asking for comments, questions, recommendations at this time. I would like to also remind you to please state your name and who you represent. I see some folks on the attendees list, but I don't see your name or the organization that you're from. If you could please type your name and the organization you represent in the chat box, that will be helpful for our records. So at this time, you are all unmuted, and we will wait and see if anyone has comments or recommendations or questions.
This is Daphne Gustafson with the Fairbanks Native Association.
Yes, can you restate your name?
Daphne, D-A-P-H-N-E, Gustafson, G-U-S-T-A-F-S-O-N.
Thank you.
The Fairbanks Native Association. And I had a question about the definition residing on or near an Indian reservation. How is this going to be applied in Alaska, where we just don't have the reservation system broadly?
Well, currently the on or near a reservation is not clearly defined by mileage or any specifics. So this is an opportunity for you, for the public, for the eligible entities to recommend a change to that wording or to define what on or near a reservation is, or possibly add to that.
Thank you. One other other question is, have you modernized the application process and the reporting process? Where might I find that information?
I will let Angela answer that. Angela?
Yes, this is Angela. What we're planning on doing in the near future is getting that on the BIE-JOM website, so that way folks can download that application and the annual report. But right now we don't have that the capability yet up there, but that's coming. As far as getting the application or the report, normally those will come from your awarding official, if you're 638, depending on how you get your contracts through. If it's a 638 477 OSG, normally they will supply that information. However, if it's something that you need and you can't access, then you can definitely send an email and I can work with you on that.
And what would that email be?
It'd be Angela, ANGELA .Barnett, that's BARNETT 1 @BIE.edu.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And will this be a formula funding based on the formula that you gave? And so it will be a determined amount so that we can properly budget for these funds, right?
Well, what the normal process is that depending again on how you get your funding, your awarding person will contact, their normal process is to contact the grantees and inform them of what the funding is going to be.
Thank you.
And that's usually done by letter. At least that's the normal process that I did when I was awarding JOM funds to tribes.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm listening to tribal consultation.
Well,
okay.
Stop that.
Okay, okay, I will.
Are you on mute?
And if you could mute your phones if you're not asking a question or providing a comment, that would be helpful.
I'll just stop that.
Okay, all right.
Other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Bonnie Kropoff at Bristol Bay Naval Association, Dillingham, Alaska. Can you provide information on how you can find the recordings?
The recording of this consultation?
Yes.
Well, it will take a little bit of time to we'll have to wait for all of our consultations to be complete, and then we will need to transcribe them. So they won't be available. I can't say exactly what date they'll be available, but it will take a little bit of time before it's posted.
Okay, and will you notify your attendees when it does get posted, or should we just keep checking back on the website?
You can send Angela an email. You can also check back on the website. And Angela's contact information is on the BIE website, JOM webpage.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Just a reminder, according to the slide, comments are due by August 26th. And if you need some time to read the proposed rule and formulate your questions and recommendations, you can submit those comments via email to consultation@bia.gov. And you can also submit comments to the website regulations.gov, search for JOM, and submit comments. We will also have we will have 2 more webinars and provide the same information. Thursday, July 25th, we have a morning session for tribes at 9 a.m. Mountain Time and a presentation for all other eligible entities at 1 o'clock Mountain Time. The links to those webinars are on the BIE JOM webpage.
Hey, this is Bonnie again. I've got one more question.
Sure.
So what's the difference between the 2 different webinars, one for the tribe and the other for the other entities?
There is nothing different in terms of what we present. We're using the exact same PowerPoint presentation. We just had a separate one for tribes. There was a Dear Tribal Leader letter that was sent out that focused on tribes, and then we also have time set aside for eligible entities. During our webinars, we haven't turned anyone away, whether they're from a tribe or public school, depending on if it's the morning or the afternoon. We just set aside time for tribes since there was a Dear Tribal Leader letter that went out.
I see. Thank you. I was just curious if I was missing something between the 2. And then just a comment, you know, I'm kind of curious how many of the other entities you've had participate, because nobody's in session at any of the schools that I know of.
Mm-hmm. I don't know the exact number, but we did have some face-to-face consultations. We had one in Tulsa, Oklahoma last week, and one in Bismarck, North Dakota. We had a morning session. I think you were on it as well, Bonnie. And then we'll have a Thursday session. So we're trying to encourage as many people to attend the webinars and to offer comments.
Yeah, I know there's some schools, some of the contractors in our area that would be interested, but they're all off for the summer, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
I have
just
a quick
comment
question.
timing school year.
This is Danny Wells, Chickasaw Nation. I have a quick question. I never could, when I clicked on the join the go to meeting, I never could get on that so I could see what you guys were displaying, even though I've seen it. So I didn't know if that was a glitch in your system or what.
I'll just ask folks on the line if they were able to join the meeting.
Okay.
This is
It could be
Bonnie.
our
I
system
emailed
block.
the link.
Is that
The
Bonnie?
link on your.
This is Angela. I went to the website as well, and I clicked on the join the meeting, and I was able to get through.
Well, I could, you know, the box you guys sent out showing advertising all the consultations is the 4 on this last one. The deal that you guys offered to click here to join, it didn't work. So I didn't know if you guys were aware of that or not.
It could
And again,
be.
it could be our system that blocks it. We have a pretty stringent system, so it could be our system that blocked it. I don't know. But although this morning we were on, we clicked on and we got on this morning without a problem. This afternoon I couldn't get on. So.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I know that you have to, sometimes it requires a small download file.
It didn't give me the option. It didn't even offer that. So we'll figure it out by Thursday.
Okay. And then sometimes you have to copy the link and then paste it into your web address. If the link isn't live, you could copy and paste it into the web address bar and see if it will take it there.
Well, see, it's kind of interesting because when you click on that, it'll pop up there, globalgotomeeting.com, but then it says need help finding something. It doesn't really, anyway. So, like I say, we'll play with it and figure it out between now and then. So.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I got through.
Okay. Well, I've just tried it again. I still can't. So, I don't know. Again, it very well could be our system. It's pretty touchy about allowing outside any outside stuff that doesn't recognize in our system. So it just because it does show an error. It says go to meeting.com/public/error. So page not found. So we'll figure something out. We'll figure it out between now and Thursday.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
And Bonnie, I want to make a correction. I think when I said we had face-to-face meetings, I think I said Tulsa, Oklahoma. I meant Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
They both start with a T. But Tahlequah is a little harder to get to than Tulsa.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we did have court reporters at the in-person session, so as soon as we get the transcripts back, then that will be an official record that we will make available.
That would be helpful for me to forward to our tribes. You know, up here in Alaska, a lot of our tribes' internet connectivity is very poor.
Okay.
Do we have enough to
Let's
know?
see. Looks like Danny, you were able to join.
Yes, ma'am. Finally got on. Raisa came and showed me how. I don't get on that enough to know. Usually my staff does it and I just come join. Today I had to be in my office, so I joined or tried joining. So thank you guys. She walked me through it, so we're good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you. I'm going to sign off.
All right, thank you. We'll stay on a little longer to see if anyone has questions.
Thanks, everyone.
If you have music on, can you mute your phone? Okay, I muted everyone because I didn't know who had the music on. I'm going to wait a little bit. We'll see if anyone else has comments or questions.
Keep it on until 4 and just see if somebody doesn't try to chime in at the hour mark or log in.
I'm sorry, Clint, can you say that again?
Yeah, it might be prudent just to wait until the hour mark comes, because in case somebody's meeting ended and they can join for the second portion, and see if we can address any comments.
Okay. And you meant 4 Eastern time, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Maureen, this is Clint. I think we're at the 4 p.m. hour, so maybe if you could review your closing comments again, and then we can probably adjourn.
Sure. So once again, a reminder that comments on the proposed rule are due August 26, 2019. You can email those comments to consultation@bia.gov, or you can email them to regulations.gov. I'm sorry, go to the website regulations.gov, search for JOM, and submit comments there. After the deadline of August 26th, the comments will be reviewed, changes will be made as appropriate, a final rule will be published in the Federal Register. The final rule will not become effective for at least 30 days after publication. The final rule is due December 31st, 2019. There will be 2 more consultation sessions this week on Thursday, July 26th, one beginning at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, and then an afternoon session Thursday, July 25th at 1:00 p.m. Mountain Time. So if there's no more comments or questions, we will adjourn.
Okay, hearing none. We want to thank everybody for joining today and taking the time to help us improve the process and program for serving our students. And if you weren't able to get your comment in today, as Maureen mentioned, there'll be 2 more opportunities as well as the open comment period. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.